Good. So that's the counter-cyclical. Let's maybe talk about non-cyclical. So look for companies that are kind of rather unrelated to the overall state of the economy or business models and assets. Well, we have the supermarket here, right? So my argument here would be that people buy food no matter how the economy is doing. You can split this up because there's, of course, expensive food, right? So the filet steak or the bottle of champagne and caviar, right? So you probably, if the economy is in a recession, you don't spend all your money on champagne, right? But, so there is some relation between spending on food, but people do have to eat every day, and there are necessities of daily life that we all purchase independent of how the economy is doing. All right, so supermarkets are have rather low betas usually. They're still positive, but rather low. Any other ideas?
Clothes, I think textile, or how it's called. We should find basic demands which are
Yes, very good. So like standard clothing, I would agree. If it's luxury clothing, again,
yeah.
probably not. Yeah, but it's exactly the type of thinking that we should look for basic things of daily life. What is another necessity?
Electricity, energy.
Yeah, so electricity and energy is a little bit a difficult one because it's also not clear cut. So most of the time energy prices are high when the economy is doing very well. Right? So because, for example, oil prices are mostly driven by industry demand, right? If the industry is doing well, people buy oil and the oil price goes up. However, and if you look, for example, as the corona pandemic here is our example for the crisis, oil demand was low, right? So the oil prices became even negative over a couple of days, which was the first time this ever happened. Because when the lockdown hit, the pipelines were full, and basically there was no demand or no one taking anything out because everyone interrupted production. So they made huge losses in the corona pandemic. So that would indicate a very high beta. But if you look at the current situation, the energy prices that we have, the oil companies at the moment have record profits. Right? So at the moment, we would consider this a recession, so a bad state, and they suddenly make a lot of money because the energy prices go up in the recession. So we had this before during the oil crisis, and this is the second instance of this. Right? So suddenly, in the current situation, we could argue that energy has a negative beta. Right? So it's not something that needs to be fixed and constant for all times. So it's very situational. And then there is the argument that we have a basic power consumption for everyday life, right? So whether we buy electricity or not as private individuals, whether we switch on the light or not, usually does not depend on whether the economy is doing well, right? We switch it on because we want to not sit in the dark at night, right? So that's a different argument. So that the basic power consumption is rather independent, right? So I definitely agree on that part. However, the industry is very strongly related to energy as well. So if we separate this out in like energy for private households and energy for industry, I would definitely agree to your argument. Maybe to give you a couple more examples, usually pharmaceutical companies are rather independent. So first of all, it's the demand for medication usually, well, it's not the wartime argument back again, right? But usually the demand for medication is rather independent. Well, vaccine producers, again, another counterexample. But also the success of research sometimes is rather random. So there are 10 companies trying to develop a medication, and one is successful, the others fail. And whether you're successful with the research that takes 10 years is usually not really depending on how the economy is doing at the time, right? It's rather random, and how diligent you work or what the skill of your researchers is. It doesn't really depend on how the economy is doing if you discover a new medication or not. And another example would be maybe stocks of sports clubs, like football clubs. Right? So in Germany, you can trade stocks of Borussia Dortmund if you like. I don't think that their probability of winning is somehow related to the stock market. Right? It's pretty random, unfortunately. But I come from near Dortmund, so. Yeah, so you could argue a little bit that jersey sales go up when the economy is doing well because more people can afford this ridiculously expensive jerseys for like 140 euros for like an authentic jersey.
But it's not the main factor.
Yeah, so I actually measured it for Borussia Dortmund, just interested in it, so it's 0.2, so it's pretty small, but it's still possible. So I would put this in the non-cyclical category. Now we could like talk about the extreme case. How about a beta equal to exactly 0, right? So you must have something that's totally unrelated. In real life, that's probably very hard to find. But I want to mention this case because of the relationship between volatility. Remember, there's a risk-free asset which has 0 volatility. 0 volatility means 0 beta, right? So the risk-free asset always has 0 beta. But the opposite direction could also, doesn't work. And it could happen that you have a 0 beta, but a positive volatility, right? So that would be something that's risky, but totally independent of the market. So if a lottery ticket was traded in the market, that would be the perfect example because it is a random draw whether you win the jackpot or not, right? So it's totally independent of the market that produce a covariance equal to 0, but it's still risky because you have certain probabilities attached to the outcomes. So let's move to the procyclical category. What stocks would you put in the procyclical bucket? What types of companies, business models?
Technology company.
Yeah. So what's the argument behind technology?
When everything is good, like when the economy is good, we have more technological developments. So kind of push the technological companies like electric car producers or phone computer producers stuff.
Yeah. I think we have to separate this a little bit out because there are different types of technologies. So you mentioned now basically consumer demand, right? So mobile phones and cars are really expensive, right? So you have a higher demand for these products, and then people are earning well, and usually they're getting their high bonus. Like you can see that when the bankers in Frankfurt get their bonus, right? You can see that in the amount of Ferraris on the street, right? So there is a direct relationship between those numbers, right? So when the economy is doing well, people are buying cars. And in a recession, you probably say, okay, I can't use my old car for a new loan, right? So you wait. And phones and all these things, computers are expensive. So, but what
I
other?
actually meant a bit different. In the technological, I mean that there's like more innovations. Like in the plan of the research, they do more things with.
Yeah. So that's a very good argument. So the whole rationale will be that companies, when they're doing well, have more money to spend on research. Right, and more research produces more innovation, and that can create new products and growth in the technology sector. Very good. I would add a last argument to this, and a big part of technology is also, it's not the products that you actually purchase as the consumer, but it's also the machines that are required to produce the consumer goods. Right, and this is a highly cyclical business. So think about, or like basically any technology that's required for infrastructure. So at the moment, when there's when there's a growth scenario, say there's a lot of travel, right? So a lot of people are flying around. So airlines start buying planes, right? Planes take like 3 or 4 years to produce, and when there's a recession, they immediately cancel all their orders, right? So companies like Boeing and Airbus, they have lots of orders at one point in time and 0 orders in the recession. And that's true for basically everything in the machinery sector. It's for shipping, for example. People buy ships when there's lots of trade around the globe, and when there's a recession, immediately all ships are canceled, all projects are canceled. And the machines that are required to produce mobile phones and semiconductors, they also have to be built. I watched a YouTube video rather accidentally the other day, that there's basically one company in the Netherlands and a German company called Carl Zeiss who's delivering parts for that. They're the only company in the world who can produce the machines for semiconductors, right? So when there's a large demand for chips, microchips like at the moment, basically this company has a very high demand. In a recession, they're probably there.
They have kind of more than 90% of like world market share producing these machines.
Yeah, so there's lots of political arguments around whether you should be exporting this to China, for example. Lots of talk around that. So machinery and like equipment producers, producers of ships and planes, that's a highly cyclical thing. So the type or the pattern the industry follows is called a Hawk cycle. Schweinezyklus in German, right? So the problem is that you have some delay until kind of the product is ready, right? So you order something and then the plane is produced in the next 2 or 3 years, right? So that means that if you need more planes and order them, well, you have to wait 3 years until the new supply enters the market and can be used. So that's why high prices can sustain for that time, right, until the shortage of planes is kind of resolved. Right? And the opposite, it takes some time. If you have lots of planes that you don't need, it takes some time kind of to take the supply down. So there's always kind of a delayed response, and that's called a Hock cycle. I mean, for agricultural goods, or pig cycle sometimes it's called, it should be apparent that if you plant out seeds, you harvest them a year later, right? So your harvest will be 1 year after the decision to produce. And this delay creates cyclicity, right? And that's exactly what you measure here. Everything that follows a Hock cycle is a pro-cyclical industry.